The head of my laboratory at MIT said, he really liked what I did for my master's thesis, said, you have to go on for a PhD. I got married in undergraduate school, by the way. I don't advise you to do that, by the way. I said, I don't want to go on for a PhD. My son just arrived. I need a full-time job. And enough is enough. I want to work as a researcher at Lincoln Lab. Well, after a lot of arm twisting, I agreed to do it. When I get a PhD, I'll have a real strong degree of independence. I can do pretty much what I want in terms of the nature of the research, the kind of job I select, and not have a significant boss above me. And even if I did, I could do something else. I could drop that boss and pick up something else.
The course was very clear. I'm coming to the US to get my master's in the first year, PhD in the second year, become a millionaire in the third, and then go back to Israel. I got my master in the first year. PhD took me longer because I had to work at the same time, and I'm still working on the million. My course, academic course, was outlined to me either by tradition or by my mother, I don't know.
My undergraduate degrees are in molecular biology and pure math, and I had to work my way through school. And I was in the Air Force before that, and I was also a professional musician. When I graduated, I was just too mentally exhausted to think about going to graduate school in either math or molecular biology, and I didn't want to get a real job. I thought, well, I've been programming for 3 or 4 years now, and I don't know anything, like most programmers, but it's fun, and so maybe I'll just go get a master's degree. A couple of years, I was out with a PhD.
Absolutely. So after all, why does one get a PhD, and why is one in research? To become wealthy? Not necessarily. It's the quality of life, the kind of work you do. Ever accept a position in doing something you don't like to do. They'll never pay you enough. Spend 40 years doing whatever it is you choose to do. And if you're going to be toiling and laboring, it's a terrible trade-off. Take the lower pay now, build up capability to do exactly what you want, at least a domain in which you enjoy doing it.
I think getting a PhD is a good idea for a number of reasons. For many people, it is a way of learning how to work better. It's a way of perhaps working on a larger problem. You have colleagues around that are basically supportive rather than competitive. It has a lot of things going. There's time built into the system, time to actually think about things in the ideal case. So I think it's basically a good idea. Dave Evans used to call it a union card. He said, you should get one, but that's what it is. One of the stations of the cross, if you're a Catholic. Something that's good for you to do, although some of the best people I've ever worked with don't have them.
But as I came here and I didn't have money to pay the tuition that's required, so I went to any university that would enable me to work at RCA laboratory and at the same time take evening classes and do my PhD, and also allow me to use my research in the laboratory as part of my PhD thesis. That was unique at that time. I think only a few universities had this arrangement. It was industry that were pioneering the highest technology, the latest technology, not university.
Is that not the case today?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Even the big companies, Google and Microsoft, I don't want to speak here against anyone who sponsors my research.
What is
my research is sponsored by ONR and NSF, none of the Googles and the Microsoft.
And isn't it interesting that the founders of these companies did not go through the natural course of education through their PhD?
I think Bill Gates is a PhD. In the sense that he wanted to do something to prove that he can do it. He didn't exactly know how to do it, but he took a risk, and that's a PhD.
Now the Zuckerbergs and the Sergey Brins, they did very well, so did Steve Jobs, but it's a risky approach. It's an all or nothing. If you fail big. With a PhD, you've got a kind of basis, a foundation on which you can grow. In business, today you're a hero, tomorrow you're a bum. It's your last success or failure that determines things. In fact, when I graduated, I had this terrific offer from Bell Labs at $12,500 a year. Now, you got to realize this was 1962. I took a job paying half that here at UCLA for $7,500, I believe.
You've been regretting that ever since.
Not for one moment.
I think it facilitates because you do have some frame. You're not completely lost in the basement putting a computer together. You have a framework. You take classes, and every time you take a class, you say, I have another tool, so I can do better. And you grow and you become almighty.
Education itself is about gaining perspective that our genes don't supply us. We are curious as children, but we're satisfied with a story as the answer. There isn't enough room in the gene plasm to actually encode much in there, so what is encoded in there is a set of behaviors that will enable the child to learn from whatever culture they're in. And if a culture doesn't have a lot of knowledge and it doesn't have a lot of process, but it does have a story mechanism, it will encode the wisdom of the culture, which is how to survive to the next generation in terms of stories. That has to be broken in order to get into modern education, modern knowledge, science, etc.
Enter a new university, it does appear to be quite frightening. It's okay to feel that way because it'll sharpen your wits and sharpen your methods of thinking. I foolishly thought that I could continue with the poor study habits I had as an undergraduate. 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, fold it in half again, and now I had 8 sides on which I would put down all the critical equations information, and in the subway I would study it like this because you couldn't stretch your hands out standing with other people. Midterm exam, and I got a 50. I had never seen anything south of 95. How could I possibly get a 50? This is totally unacceptable. This was a wake-up call. There's 2 ways to respond to a wake-up call. You run and hide, or you face the challenge. So lesson number 1 is, you're going to get whacked on the head, respond to it, take note of it, and do the right thing.
The principal called her to school. I thought he's calling her because I was rowdy. But it turns out she came back and she said, no, he just said, sell everything you have but give him education. I was lucky. It's going to be good. I have a generation of teachers, which not every generation has. Because, I was part of the great educational experiment in Israel, where all my teachers were European Jews that were pushed by Hitler and were displaced of their jobs in Germany, in Heidelberg, in Berlin, and they came to teach in Tel Aviv, and they couldn't find the academic jobs, so they became high school teachers. Imagine that today, in California, they force every professor to spend 5 years teaching high school. What benefit would it do to the high school education? Tremendous.
Incredible.
Right? But I was lucky. It wasn't a good time in history, but my generation was lucky in the sense that every one of my teachers was a polyglot. He could teach from geometry to geography to history to you name it, without notes, going on a board and make it exciting, as if he or she was part of the Cavendish experiments in 1795 or so. As if he saw Galileo throw the 2 rocks and waiting to see if they arrive at the same time. And they taught science in chronological order, the way things were discovered, not the way they are logically arranged in textbooks like we see today. Okay? So I grew up with Faraday and with Maxwell.
Is that why you developed your interest in original editions?
Yes,
of,
that's why. That's why today I'm collecting original editions. Yeah. I like to have the feeling, sort of the way that the discovery was published first and came to public domain and came to the laboratories, and people opened and say, "What's that?" Oh, the double helix never work. It's exciting.
As a high school student, as an undergraduate, you are the beneficiary of an unbelievable gift. Your teachers are giving you the kernels of 2,000 years of science and mathematics, and they present them to you the great results. Every day it's a new gift. You don't realize it. Pythagorean theorem, oh, okay. Quadratic theorem, okay. So you get the impression that research is a fluid process whereby You just cross the frontier with great ease. Maxwell comes along, boom. Well, Maxwell didn't do it that easy, nor did anyone. You hit that frontier and it's a hard stop. And to go epsilon over that frontier is enormously difficult. I'm saying that because the graduate students need to understand that when they hit that bump, that barrier, they're not failing. Everybody hits it. Research is hard. The rewards are great. And the typical progress of a graduate student, a research student, is the following. Time versus progress. Starts out, no progress. You give a graduate student an idea, it goes blip, and doesn't catch fire. Blip, doesn't catch. And then one day, highly nonlinear, they take off. They've got an idea and they start running with it. And when they get beyond your capabilities as an advisor to follow, you know they've made it. So the point is, don't be discouraged when you realize you're not getting anywhere. It doesn't go like that forever. You have to have the faith to believe that you will catch on and it will succeed.
On the other hand, today students also have opportunities that were not there back then, because how often was it that somebody fresh out of school with a PhD or even before a PhD was able to start a multi-billion-dollar company?
Well, you don't start a multi-billion-dollar company. You
start
start a company with debt. But you're right, and I think that is the wonderful opportunity. No reason why any smart person can't try something that'll sell on the internet or around the internet technology. There's so many opportunities. And it's worth a shot, especially early in your career, you know, to try to shoot for the moon. Because I'll tell you, whereas there are hard, serious, challenging problems in academia and in research, creating a business is every bit as challenging, even though people in research look down on business as a dirty, sloppy position. Let me tell you, it's challenging. I've done a few myself. Some are successful, some are not. You've got to think about it just as hard as your research problems. You have to manage it. But the opportunities are large. If you don't get involved in the business world as a faculty member, you're basically shortchanging yourself and your students. So getting that practical view is really critical to making you into a well-rounded engineer as well as a researcher. Computing has become the enemy of good thinking. It's too easy to generate a set of numbers through a simulation or a calculation. Present the numbers and say, well, that's the way the system behaves. And my response is, what are you talking about? Do you understand why it behaves that way? You get a number, you get a result. Ask yourself, what did I learn from this? Is there a principle? And I fear too many of the students I've been seeing these days just bypass that step. They don't even think to ask the question. And you may remember Boris Kogan.
Yes.
Our 90-year-old, brilliant professor from the Soviet Union who came here. And after this great lecture from the prospective candidate, and there'd be a few questions asked, he'd sit there hunched over and he'd say, tell me, young man, exactly what is your contribution? If you don't understand what you've done and why it works that way, you've cheated yourself. I don't want to waste my time fooling around with something insignificant that was not exciting and would have impact. All my classmates were doing work in coding theory and information theory because Claude Shannon, had developed a theory. There's a whole army of graduate students picking up the pieces that were left over. These problems that are left are too small and too hard. Don't follow the pack. Think for yourself and set your own goals. Don't just assume what your classmates are doing is what you should be doing. Shoot for something with impact. Take a high risk, high payoff. If you can find a field that nobody's been in, whose solution will have an impact on society, that's about the best possibility. A, you get impact, and B, the low-hanging fruit is there. Nobody's been looking at the field. And that occurs in the white spaces between disciplines. I have a good friend who 15 years after he got his PhD called up his advisor, who was a classmate of mine at the time. And he asked him for some advice, and the advisor said, I'm no longer your advisor. That was 15 years ago. And the response by my friend was, being an advisor is a tenured position. You've got it forever. And that's the way it should be considered. I keep in touch with most of my students.
So finding a good match between a student and an advisor is good.
It's the biggest. So the real person is, who's the person that's going to let you be yourself?
In fact, as a graduate student, your classmates are going to become the colleagues with whom you interact for the rest of your life. And that physical interaction and the relationships you develop as a graduate student are every bit as important as the research you do. Be sure to engage with your classmates. Don't be isolated. Get an office at the university, share it with other people, interact, share your ideas. If you and I were classmates, I'd be telling you all the research I was doing, all the problems I was having, all the results I was getting, and I'd ask your advice to critique, to suggest alternative approaches, and you do the same with me. And just being in the environment, the cathedral, if you will, it just changes your view as to where you are and what you're doing. You don't get distracted with something that appears in the real world right now. Focus on this while you are there. You've got to understand the culture of the academic institution you're considering. Some match better to students than to others. And it's important to get to know who the faculty are, what they've done, who their students are, where they've gone, what the curriculum looks like, what the general philosophy is, how interdisciplinary the offerings are. The opportunities here at UCLA are fantastic. Not only is it a great institution, but you get great climate, you got the ocean, you got skiing, you got Hollywood. Honestly, it's a great attraction.
Some uncle told me, you better go to a better university or else you get stuck.
What makes a good university?
Reputation. Just you go someplace and you say, I come from so and so, and if you want people to look down at you or up at you and listen to you, you better come from a place with a name. For me, UCLA was a very good environment. The faculty gave me support and freedom to do what I want. At the time, what I wanted to do was not popular. Artificial intelligence wasn't popular, and then within artificial intelligence, probabilistic reasoning wasn't popular, and today within everything, causal reasoning is not popular, but it's fun, If I were to do what I knew I can do, it wouldn't be fun. Come with a topic that you are passionate about. Forget about your advisor and start doing it. Surprise him with the product. That's the best way. Look, if a student from, North Korea writes to you and say, I'm so-and-so and I am the best in my class and I would like to come to UCLA. I wouldn't even open the message. But if he says, I found a mistake in your article number 59, okay, instead of that, or I have a way of generalizing to XYZ. You only do it for XY. Then you look at him and say, hey, come over.
You already had the internal drive and motivation to know what you wanted to do, which is rare. Not very many students have that coming into their PhD.
I only knew that I want to do something which is intellectually challenging. That I could say, wow, I broke this barrier of ignorance. I can do something today that I couldn't do yesterday. So that was my only drive.
Before I was there a year, I realized that this was really what ARPA wanted to do, to make computing be a kind of intellectual amplifier for people and to pervasively network these amplifiers worldwide. Was just one of the greatest, most romantic ideas.
Yeah, first of all, don't pay attention to the rules of university. Rules here are made to be broken, or to have an exception, or to be massaged, and so on. Okay, so just stay on course, and have the bureaucrats worry about the rules.
How were you able to branch out so much from what you started?
I think that a PhD is a litmus test for a certain discipline, and for certain curiosity. So once you go through that hardship, actually it's fun, it's not hardship, and you go through this period, you prove to yourself that you can do it. And that is, I think, it's tremendous asset no matter what you're doing. Say, look, I didn't know how to do something, now I know how to do it, and I did it myself. I went to the literature, I put things together, I defied conventional wisdom. So that's a great asset to carry with you even you become a manager of Microsoft.
Make failure work for you. We're not talking about being afraid of failure and gathering the courage to go through it. We're what we're talking about is putting failure in its proper place, given what it is that we're trying to do, which is it doesn't matter a hill of beans as long as you're willing to keep trying different perspectives, as long as you don't break too many of Newton's laws.
Faculty are risk averse. It's up to the student to take on risks and be willing to do that. And of course, getting a PhD is risky. You may not get it, and if you get it, you may or may not get the position you're looking for, but it gives you a basis of credentials, a license to choose your path. And I think that's really very important.